right. Welcome back to the Bookly podcast. And this week's episode is a solo episode, mostly because I don't think I could have convinced anybody to read this week's book with me. I put this book on my book list, mostly because everywhere I Googled, everyone said that this is one of the greatest books of all time. It won a Pulitzer Prize. It had phenomenal reviews everywhere I go. And then that is not the feedback that I get from everyone around me. So this week's book is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And before I read this book, I put up on the Instagram, which if you're not following us on Instagram, this is kind of my plug for you to go follow us on Instagram at Bookly Podcast, I think is what it is. I should have probably written that down before I started here. But definitely give us a follow because we're trying to get a little bit more engagement from people with just questions and overall impressions from books that are coming up. And I put out there that I was going to be reading The Road this week just to get an idea of what people were thinking. And I didn't read any of the comments before I read the book because I didn't want them to sway my opinion of the book whatsoever. So I just read them after. Actually, I just read them before I started compiling all of my notes here. And the consensus was basically this book is terrible. And not only was the consensus that this book is terrible, but like my sister who's been on the podcast, let me pull up exactly what she said because this pretty much sums up what people's thoughts were. She said, I hated this book passionately. Like it wasn't even that she hated it a little bit or that this was not my cup of tea. She absolutely hated this book. And that's what everybody else said. I mean, there were a couple of people who, said, I think the exact quotes were like, this book scarred my high school child. And the fact that this book is even recommended for high schoolers kind of shocks me. Not that I'm out there trying to get books canceled or anything out of high school, but mostly from like a grammatical standpoint, this book is absolutely atrocious, but also two, from like a just psychological perspective, there's not a whole lot of pluses in this book for mental health. So for a generation of people who struggle pretty severely with depression and anxiety, this book is just like not the book for you. Not the book at all. Like this book is dark, dreary, and there's, I don't want to say no happiness, but I might be willing to step out on a ledge there and say that this book has zero happiness in it. Even the relationship between the father and the son is just, it's not a happy relationship. I don't know. That was just the taste that I got from it. So I'll dive more into my review overall of the book. But to start off, I do want to read the description of the book from Goodreads so that you can, for those of you who have not heard of this book or the movie, because it was made into a movie shortly after the book, or any of the other glowing reviews that are all over the internet, let me just read real quick what this book is all about. So it is a searing post-apocalyptic novel. This is the Goodreads, just blurb real quick. A searing post-apocalyptic, wow, that's a hard word to say on a podcast, novel destined to become Cormac McCarthy's masterpiece. A father and his son walk alone through burned America. Nothing moves in the ravaged landscape save the ash and the wind. It is cold enough to crack stones, and when the snow falls, it is gray. The sky is dark. Their destination is the coast, although they don't know what, if anything, awaits them there. They have nothing, just a pistol to defend themselves against the lawless band that stalk the road, the clothes they are wearing, a cart of scavenged food, and each other. The Road is a profoundly moving story of a journey. It boldly imagines a future in which no hope remains, but in which the father and his son, each the other's world entire, are sustained by love. Awesome in its totality of its vision, it is an unflinching mediation in the worst and the best that we are capable of. Ultimate destructiveness, desperate tenacity, and the tenderness that keeps two people alive in the face of total devastation. So that is the description on Goodreads. Sounds like a pretty awesome book. That is not the book that I feel like I read at all. Because that book sounds exciting. It sounds like there's going to be almost, not a good adventure, but an adventure to be told. And it sounds like, the relationship between the father and the son is really going to be at its core, like a good, happy relationship that battles everything against like the bleak and dreary world. And I just don't feel like it was. So my overall impression of this book, honestly, it's not as terrible as my sister. So I did not hate this book passionately. I will say that. I think there are things about this book that I appreciate, but overall, this book was not my cup of tea. I did not enjoy this book, and I actually do enjoy post-apocalyptic. I cannot say that word on a podcast. I can say it normal, just talking with people. But when I have to say it in front of a camera, my tongue just Okay, so post-apocalyptic books and movies, I actually really, really enjoy them. So it wasn't the genre for me, and it wasn't even, I can kind of stomach a lot of darkness in books, I think. It doesn't really affect me as much as it maybe should. But no, as much as it like affects my wife and other people that I know. So it wasn't even so much that it was dark. I just didn't really enjoy this book. It felt very repetitive. Not a lot happens. And there was like a brief moment of this book all coming together. And I felt like that part was amazing. So I will say that there was a moment in the book that I actually really enjoyed. But it was one moment among all of these pages that I honestly couldn't care less about. So that's my review of this book. We'll dive deeper into what that means and everything. But I did want to start off with a little bit more about the author, mostly because this might be a shorter episode of the podcast because I don't really have a whole lot to say about this book. And because of that, we're going to dive into a bunch of other stuff that also might bring this book a little bit of meaning. I don't know. People rave about Cormac McCarthy. So I tried to figure out why, because apparently a lot of his books are like this. So I want to talk about the author. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the awards this book got, the recognition, and then dive deeper into my likes and dislikes. So if you are reading or you're listening along, I just want to say, take a quick time out because apparently this is what you're supposed to do during all of this kind of stuff. And I'm still learning about all this. So just make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe if you are watching on YouTube. We're going to do like a quick break. And I guess, I don't know, this is sounding a lot more awkward than I wanted it to sound. But like this video and comment what you thought about The Road because it gets a lot of glowing reviews, but I just don't get it. So comment what you thought, and then also make sure to like this video. And if you are listening on podcast on Apple or Spotify, go ahead and leave us a 5-star review. Follow us on Instagram real quick while you're listening to this. Find the post for this book because I post an episode announcement every single episode. So find the post about this book. It should be the latest one. And leave me a comment what you thought about this book because I'm really, really actually interested to know what people thought about this book because I just don't get it. I don't. And maybe I'm missing something. So I want people to tell me what I'm missing because I don't know. It blows my mind. So thank you for that. Thanks for bearing with me throughout that awkward pause there. Cormac McCarthy. So pretty famous author. A lot of people have said that he's kind of one of the, I don't know, will be viewed as one of the most influential authors of our time, which is crazy. So I kind of, when I started reading this book, I don't know why, I have like these preconceived notions about books before I go into them. And then I read the book and I'm like, wow, that was nothing like I thought. And then I'm like, well, maybe it's because of X, Y, and Z. So I rationalize my preconceived notions so that I can still keep them because I don't want to get rid of them. Just like everybody else, I have my ideas and I want to be right. And so I was like, well, maybe this book just was written a really long time ago. And so maybe that's why I didn't like it. Maybe this was like groundbreaking, trend setting. Like this was the post-apocalyptic book of, the 50s or the 40s, I don't know, like forever ago. And so like maybe that's why it was amazing. Nope. So Cormac McCarthy died this last year. And so in 2023, and this book was was released in 2006 was when it was released. So, I mean, we're not even 20 years old at this point. Not even 20 years old. So about Cormac McCarthy, he died when he was 89, I want to say, I think. I don't know. I should have written that down in my notes. But so he was an old guy, died recently. So he was, I don't know, I would just say about the lifespan of like my grandfather. And, you know, that's about the time and era in which he lived. And a little bit about him. A lot of his books have become very famous. So when people say that he might go down as one of the most influential authors of our time, I could see why maybe they could say that, because I mean, I've heard of a lot of his books, and 5 of his books have actually been made into movies. So he is a very, I guess, culturally influential person. Whether or not you like his books or not, they are mixed in with the culture. And that's kind of how I gauge like culturally relevant authors is, you know, how much do the books play into kind of your modern landscape of things, but also kind of what kind of effect do they have down the road. And I mean, he's got 5 movies. I know No Country for Old Men won like a ton of Academy Awards. So it was like an acclaimed movie. It wasn't just, you know, a movie to make a movie's sake. So it was a pretty big deal. I know The Road was made into a movie. So this book was made into a movie, and it was played by and the main character, who is unnamed, was played by Viggo Mortensen. So Aragorn from The Lord of the Rings. And it was made pretty recently after Lord of the Rings, I want to say. So it was made in 2009. Oh, what was it? I have it written down here somewhere. Made in 2009. I'm not going to find it because my notes are scattered. But nope, not going to find it. But yeah, we're just going to say 2009 because I'm fairly certain that's when the movie was made, which makes it pretty soon after Lord of the Rings. So Viggo Mortensen was kind of like a hot commodity at the time, is the way that I would describe that, because, I mean, he had just come off of the greatest trilogy of all time, playing Aragorn, one of the most beloved characters of all time in the greatest trilogy of all time. He was a big deal. And so he played the father in this movie. So to snag him as a actor within this movie, I would say was kind of a big deal. Again, just goes to show the cultural importance of this book, I would say. Whether or not you liked it or not, you have to admit it does play a pretty big role in the culture. So Cormac McCarthy, I would say in general, was pretty influential. A couple things about him. If you've read any of his books, you know that he's not the biggest fan of punctuation. I did not read this book. I will go ahead and add a disclaimer here. I did not read this book. And a lot of people said that I should read this book because of the way it was written. It's written very different. Again, Cormac McCarthy doesn't use hardly any punctuation, rarely uses commas, rarely uses semicolons, never uses a colon, doesn't really use even quotation marks. So you have no idea who's speaking at any point. It just is a sentence with periods, and you're supposed to like try to figure out who's talking because they could have conversations, and there's no break in the writing to designate who's having a conversation. So a lot of people said because of that, I should read it. And what I will say is I read parts of it. So I read enough that I got the feel for the way that he wrote. So I went and got the book, and I read a pretty good chunk of it. I mean, definitely not half, and definitely not even a third or a fourth. But I read enough to really understand what people were talking about in the punctuation department. And then I listened to the rest. And just personally, anybody who's new to this podcast, I listen to almost all of my books. I absorb more when I'm listening. And I think it's an equal skill to reading. I think it is each one of them is their own unique skill, and I will die on that hill. And if you'd like to argue with me, you can come on my podcast and argue with me, and I will fight with you till the ends of time. I do think reading books and listening to books are not the same, but equivalent in value. You can fight me. But I did want to read this just because of the writing style. And I already struggle with reading. Not that I can't sound words out and stuff like that, but I'm just slow at it. I don't read very fast. My comprehension is, I would say, average to slightly below average, maybe. Whenever I took any exams in high school, you had to take those SATs and PSATs or what ACTs, or I don't know, all the lettered exams to get into college, or at least you used to before COVID, and they just got rid of those. Lucky. But you used to have to take all those reading exams. I used to get either a perfect score or almost a perfect score on math and science, and then I would get like third grade reading levels on all of the rest of my tests, and so it would average out, and I'd be like a decently smart kid. But it was because I was literally acing the math and the science sections of things, and then just struggled with reading comprehension. So because of that, I've always had to just reread things and read slowly in order to really absorb what's being said. And this book was infinitely harder. So if you struggle or are a slow reader, this book makes it really, really, really hard to read and be quick about reading and get through this book, because you're constantly having to think, all right, who's talking here? Who's talking here? What's going on? Like, you just don't really know. And it's just, I don't know. It's just hard. And I wasn't a huge fan of that. And I just had a quick quote, or I guess not even a quote, but Oprah Winfrey brought Cormac McCarthy onto her show and asked him about why he doesn't use punctuation. And he just said that he prefers simple declarative sentences, that he uses capital letters, periods, and an occasional comma or colon for setting a list off, but never semicolons, which he labeled as idiocy. So, he doesn't use punctuation. Even on national television, talking to Oprah Winfrey, he called semicolons idiocy. And then kind of a known thing about the way that he writes is that instead of using commas, he just uses the word and. And so he uses the word and very frequently. And his writing just feels very, short sentences that just kind of are chopped together and then just, I don't know how to put it, but did not love that. However, listening to this book made it definitely easier to digest, in my opinion. So if you struggle with this book, maybe you start this book. So say you start this book, you're, I don't know, 30 pages in, and you're just like, I hate this book, but you want to still finish it. Get the audiobook, because the audiobook, at least the narrator does different voices. Like, he has a little kid's voice and then he has the adult's voice. And so it's very easy to tell who's talking, because he enunciates it. I guess he has his own voice. Yeah. he talks. It's the same narrator, but he definitely has a different voice for the kid and the adult. What I will say, though, is that I hated the adult voice. He sounded super, uneducated, abrupt, short, and maybe that played into my overall lack of emotional connection between the two characters, because I felt like the father was just very rude and abrupt the whole time, which I guess maybe came from a little bit from the narrator. So pick your poison. I don't think either one is perfect. It's not my favorite narrator that I've ever listened to, but I've also heard the book is just very difficult to read. So you kind of have to choose which way that you'd like to go with that. More interesting facts about Cormac McCarthy. So he knew from a very, young age that he always wanted to be a writer. He dedicated himself to writing full time, even before he had his first full break. He would be very Steven Pressfield approved, which, for those of you who don't know, Steven Pressfield wrote, I wanted to say The Obstacle is the Way, but that's Ryan Holiday. What's the one that everybody loves that we just did a podcast episode about? I think we did it back in November. No, just kidding. December, I think. One sec. It'll come back to me. I'm just going through my notes. Bear with me. The War of Art, Steven Pressfield. Yep. Stephen Pressfield approved. That is Cormac McCarthy, because he gave everything to his creative passion, and that he knew from a very young age that that's what he wanted to do, and that he chose not to work any other jobs in order to support his career. He would just write. And he just kind of had the mentality that he knew that everything was going to work out, and that he had to be dedicated 100% to his craft in order for that to happen. And so early in his career, him and his family were pretty poor. It says that they were actually subject to pretty extreme poverty until he hit his big break, because he just chose not to do anything but write. So, like I said, that is very Stephen Pressfield approved. That is kind of the method of the war of art. You just have to do your craft, and then, you're rewarded, and by defeating what is that? I should remember this kind of stuff. The resistance. You're rewarded by defeating the resistance in your life, and you become what you want to become. And that is the story of Cormac McCarthy. So kind of cool to see kind of like a living, breathing embodiment of the war as art. And if you are interested in the war as art, check out that episode of the podcast. Again, not my favorite book, but there were some things that I really enjoyed about it. So you can check out that book. I think that that's probably I know it's my most disliked video that I've ever posted on YouTube. And I think it's because some people live and die and breathe by that book. And the fact that I didn't like it, people are all up in arms and offended. Get over yourselves. If you don't like what I say, it's fine. We're allowed to disagree, but you don't have to dislike my video. Come on. It doesn't help. So if you're listening to this and you want to help me out, just ratio the crap out of anybody who disliked that video, go to the War's Art and just like it for me, just so that somebody else, so all its dislikes don't count. Again, people are weird about that book. They're like obsessive. Sorry, that was a little bit of a tangent there. And kind of I don't know if it's the weirdest thing, but kind of the thing that caught me most off guard about Cormac McCarthy was the fact that Stephen King, who, again, if anybody listens to the podcast knows that I'm a huge Stephen King fan, had never read any of his books up until last year. I think I've read 7 or 8 of his books now, and absolutely love just about all of them. He's phenomenal. He definitely writes the way that I like. And so just overall, big fan of Stephen King. And so Stephen King said this after Cormac McCarthy died, again, this past year, about 8 months ago. He said, "Maybe the greatest American novelist of my time. He was full of years and created a fine body of work, but I still mourn his passing." So Stephen King even said that Cormac McCarthy may be the greatest American novelist of his time. That is some crazy high praise for Cormac McCarthy. And yeah, I don't know. I'm reading another Cormac McCarthy book, not this next week, but the week after. We're reading No Country for Old Men. And maybe that'll change my mind. Maybe it'll be a little bit different. I don't know. Just not a huge fan of his writing style. So that's Cormac McCarthy. Take it with whatever you will. I don't know what that saying is, but yeah, he is, I would say, a beloved novelist, just maybe not beloved by me. I don't know. That's going to be, I don't know is the mantra of this episode, because I'm so conflicted about this book, and we'll dive into it here in just a sec. But this book got a 3.99 on Goodreads, which is pretty good, honestly. That's really not bad. Like, there are a lot of 3.99 books on Goodreads that I actually really like, really like. And I'm going to compare it to one of them here in just a sec. But in 2007, it won the Pulitzer Prize, which is crazy. That's given to one fiction book every single year, and it won it. So, in 2007, I was looking to see what other books came out in 2007. Something right up the same alley as this book was World War Z, also came out that year. So if you're trying to think about, maybe again, it's, innovative for its time. Like, no, the post-apocalyptic craze was going on during this time. World War Z had come out the same exact year. There were a couple other books. I think there was like a Twilight. One of the Twilight books came out that year. I guess not Pulitzer Prize winning material, but this was kind of, if you can put yourself into that time in history and figure out, what other books were coming out during that time, those were the books that were coming out. It also was chosen by Oprah Winfrey as part of her book club. It was made into a movie 3 years. Yeah, that's what it was. So found it in my notes. It was made 3 years after the release. So in 2009, it was made into a movie, which, just for reference about like the speed at which that is, that a book comes out and then almost immediately the movie comes out. Hunger Games took around the same amount of time. I want to say Hunger Games was 4 years from the book coming out. And again, this may depend on what month of the year that it came out on. So maybe it was like a December release. And then, so it took 4 years, but it's really the same amount of months. I have no idea. But if you're just looking at the year release dates, Hunger Games took 4 years to go from book to movie. And Hunger Games is the highest selling science fiction book series of all time. It beats out like Dune, which has been around forever. It beats out 1984. It beats out, Slaughterhouse-Five. It beats out Fahrenheit 451. It beats out everything for science fiction book sales. And the same amount of time to make a movie. So if you can kind of gauge popularity by, how fast it takes Hollywood to pick something up and pump out a movie, then, this book was that popular. I don't know if that means anything, but to me, that all kind of makes sense. And yes, this book was a very, very popular book, very, very critically acclaimed, and everybody seemed to love it. But I want to read a few reviews on Goodreads because this is just kind of how I feel. Sorry about that. But here is a review from somebody who gave it a 1-star review. And a 1-star review, honestly, I think is a little harsh because I don't think it is quite a 1-star. But this is kind of sums up how I feel about this book a little bit. And they said, here's the start of the review. I am stunned to find such a critical following for a novel that is so clearly bad that I have yet to meet a flesh and blood person who does not hate it or cannot, even after the most mild inquiries, explain its appeal beyond the latent thought that they ought to like it. Now, this is spot on. I have yet to meet somebody, and not a single person in all of my little responders on Instagram liked this book. I have yet to talk to somebody who's been like, oh, The Road? I loved that book. So if you are out there and you're listening to this, which is a small intersection of people, leave me a comment. Like I said, I want to know if you liked this book because this review was, that's spot on. I have yet to meet somebody who's like, loved it, even though all of the critically acclaimed, the rewards, the movie, the everything, I still, whenever I talk to people and I'm saying I'm reading The Road, everybody's like, oof, I'm sorry. That sucks. Hated that book. Good luck. Like that's the response I got from every single person that I talked to face to face. Every single person. So if you're out there and you are not like that, leave me a comment because I've yet to meet somebody who did not like it. Now, here are some of the higher star reviews. And again, I think that the previous review that I read kind of nailed it on the head when they said at the very end, explain its appeal beyond the latent thought that they ought to like it. I think that was pretty spot on. I feel like people feel like they have to like it because of how critically acclaimed it is. It's like one of those things where it's like modern art, right? Modern art sucks. Everybody can agree. I don't want to be a blanket term. Just kidding. Most modern art sucks. There are some that I actually do think is pretty cool. But a lot of modern art is just straight garbage. And people spend a boatload of money on it because they ought to like it. And that's what I feel like this book is. It's like the modern art version of the post-apocalyptic book world. And to prove it, I pulled a couple of reviews here. So this is a 3-star review on Goodreads. Let me remind anybody who doesn't use Goodreads, Goodreads is out of 5 stars. So this is a 3 out of 5. That's pretty decent. This is what they said. I sort of feel guilty. I did not like this book more, as I know it is seen as a masterpiece. However, I'm willing to read more by the author. How is that a 3-star review? I sort of feel guilty that I didn't like this book more. That's 3 stars. That's what gives you 3 stars. If that's what gives you 3 stars, like, I really should like this book, but I guess I gotta give it 3 stars. Like, that's a terrible review. That's a garbage review. Don't give it 3 stars. Like, if you didn't like the book, you didn't like the book. This is, again, what goes into this 3.99 on Goodreads. People are going to be misled by people like you because you gave it a 3 stars, when in actuality, you should have probably given it a 2, maybe even a 1. You didn't like it. Just say you didn't like it. It's okay. No one's going to think less of you. I promise. So here's a 4-star review on Goodreads. Now, this is a 4 out of 5. This is a good book. A 4 out of 5 should be a really good book, like a good book. A 4 out of 5 is a book that you tell people about and you're like, hey, you should read this book. I enjoyed this book. I mean, a 5 out of 5 is a perfect book. This is a book that's going to go on your all-time greats list. This is a book that you're going to just tell everybody about. These are my favorite books. You rattle off your 5 out of 5s. A 4 out of 5 is a book, though, that should be, like, I really, really enjoyed this book. Like, this was super fun. I really liked this book. This may have been one of your favorite books of the year. I mean, that's a 4 out of 5, right? So 4 out of 5. And this is a direct quote from their book. Not much of a plot to speak of in this book, and everything sounds like a pointless and painful attempt at surviving in a world that is already charred and dead. That's your 4 out of 5? Really? Not much of a plot to speak about in this book. They go on to rationalize that by saying that, he did a very good job of making it kind of bleak. But that doesn't make a 4 out of 5, does it? Like, really? Is that really what a 4 out of 5 is? Now, to kind of drill this point home as to why I didn't like this book. This book is 241 pages, 3.99 on Goodreads, 241 pages. So it's not a super long book. There are a total on Goodreads of 433 submitted quotes from this book. So that's 433 passages from this book that people found some sort of importance and or just liked from this book. Let's contrast that with Animal Farm, who also has a 3.99 on Goodreads. I tried to find another short book on Goodreads that is 128 pages, so almost exactly half the size of the book. And Animal Farm has 468 quotes on it. So half the size, and it has 40 more quotes that people find relevant, important, or just like parts of that book more, or like parts of that book, And why is that? Because there is nothing to pull from the road the entire time. They're right. There's nothing. There's no quotable material. There's no moments within the book that you want to remember. There's nothing. Like, it is so repetitive, and it's a lot of just filler nonsense that there's just nothing to pull from the book. In a book that's half the size, you can pull more information out of it. And the reason is because there's just nothing in the road. The road is nothing. So that is my ranting about Goodreads. That's my review of reviews. And now time to get into what I actually thought about the book. And this is not going to be terribly long because my thoughts are pretty succinct and I don't think they're going to change. So let's start with the good. The good things about this book. It really does feel post-apocalyptic. Now, if I had to say anything about the writing choice, and I had to say anything about kind of what Cormac McCarthy does create in The Road, it is a actual, very realistic feeling of apocalypse. Now, the book doesn't describe what happened. There is no, there's no, nuclear bomb. There's no super volcano. There's no super virus. There's no nothing. The book starts off, the characters don't have names. You have no idea where they are, and you have no idea what happened. All you know is that everybody's dead, and there are some terrible people out there that are taking advantage of a terrible situation, and there's this father and the son, and they're just trying to go west. That's all you know. I mean, really, that's the essence of the book. There's not a whole lot of build up. I mean, when I say not a whole lot of, there is literally zero build up to this book. It just starts at one point, and then it just keeps going. So I kind of liked that choice, to be completely honest, because it almost felt hopeless in the book. You feel very lost in the book. Like the first, quarter of the book, you feel lost. Like you feel like you wondering what's going on. He's very repetitive in the book. Like not a lot happens in this book, to be completely honest. A lot of walking and a lot of scavenging for food. And I feel like that's very like hyper realistic. So I was reading a lot of other people's reviews and, I watched some YouTube videos about what people liked and didn't like about this book. And one of the things that kept coming up is that in most post-apocalyptic books and most kind of, books where 99% of the population is dead, a good example of that would be The Stand by Stephen King, which I absolutely loved. A lot happens in the book. Like the characters run into other characters and, they meet randomly and they find each other in these cities. And one of the people that I was listening to pointed out statistically very unlikely. Like if 99.99% of the planet is wiped out, the likelihood that you as an individual would run into another individual while trying to cross the United States is slim to none. So because of that, I felt like this book was much more realistic. Like the father and the son, the entire time, were always looking over their backs. They were always looking both directions on the road. They were listening. They were hyper observant. They tried to stay off the road when they thought danger was coming. They didn't stay in one place too long, anything like that. However, rarely did anything happen, which doesn't make for a very exciting book. However, that kind of suspense, kind of parallel with the kind of monotony of everyday life, I feel like is very realistic to how this situation would actually play out. And so because of that, I feel like Cormac McCarthy actually created a post-apocalyptic world that was believable. So I thought that part of the book was very good. You really did feel hopeless reading the book. You felt very, day-to-day life felt very mundane, but you also were very scared while reading. Like you could feel kind of that anxiety, the what if factor, but at the same time, like none of that ever happened or none of that ever came to fruition because of the just completely unlikely nature of two people running into each other on their travels, because there are no people. Everybody is dead. And so I thought that was really, really well done and well illustrated. So if I had to give anything, or if I had to say anything about the book, I would say the world that was set up was amazing. Almost too amazing that it was boring. And that would be, I think, my biggest criticism also of the book, is that it was just kind of boring. A lot of what happened was very routine, they're just, they're scavenging for food in one place. They're in a store. Now they're scavenging for food in a house. Now they're scavenging for food in a bunker. Now they're scavenging for food on a ship. Now they're scavenging for food here. And it's just a lot of doing the same thing over and over and over in different locations as they try to make their way west. And that's really what it would be like. That's pretty realistic. If I had to guess what, the world would look like if you were one of the 0.01% of the population that survived, that's what it would look like. You would be trying to survive the next day, scared that somebody's going to find you, but realistically, somebody's not going to find you. Like nobody's going to run into you. So that I thought was very good. I really, really thought that was good. The world was good. Again, it was almost too good that it was boring. Now, the other thing that, one thing that kind of irked me is that the world that he creates is almost so realistic. And it's also very, like I said, it's much more statistically likely than a lot of the other stories that you read, in The Stand. They run into people left and right. They're constantly running into people. And again, statistically very unlikely. So the fact that this remained a little bit more true to what a post-apocalyptic world would be was really cool. However, every once in a while they threw in just something that, again, just seemed so unlikely that I was like, you kind of ruined it there. You create this world that's just so real. And then, somewhere in the first quarter of the book, there's a dude that's burned to pieces in the middle of shuffling in the middle of the road, who had been struck by lightning and set on fire. It's like, okay, what are the likelihood that somebody's going to be struck by lightning? Slim to none. Now, what is the likelihood that somebody's going to be struck by lightning when there's hardly any people on the entire planet left over? 0.00000000000 0, 1. Like infinite zeros and then a 1 in there is like the likelihood that when there's no people on the planet, the one guy that you run into is going to have been struck by lightning and be all charred. I don't know. It made for like a chilling depiction of a old man that was, charred and burned, and his clothes were, kind of almost on fire, and all this kind of stuff. Like, it made for a very gross, half alive, half dead character in the book that was scary to the boy, and the man was like, oh, we got to keep moving. So it made for a very interesting encounter. But again, you created a world that's so real. Why throw in the fact that the only person that you've seen for the last 6 months also managed to be struck by lightning? I don't know. I didn't like that. I didn't like either be super, super hyper realistic or be the other direction. Be the novel that's kind of over the top, kind of like World War Z, very statistically unlikely, but also like fun and, around every corner. Pick a lane. So that was one of the things that I didn't like. It also happens at the very end of the book as well, when after the father dies, 3 days later, the boy is picked up by a good person. And it's like, okay, you just traveled forever across the entire, the entire United States, found the West Coast. I think they encountered like 1, 2, 3, 4 people their entire journeys across the thing. And then 3 days after the father dies, the son is just picked up by a good guy. It's like, I don't know. Again, very statistically unlikely. Like, pick a lane. Either create a backstory, like a slight backstory for the people that found him, saying that they had spotted him forever ago and they were just waiting, or I don't know, some sort of something to make it a little bit more realistic, or make it super hyper realistic and nobody finds the boy. I don't know, but just don't be too realistic and then throw in these moments of just whatever. I don't know. That was my opinion. That was my opinion. Kind of ruined some of the magic for me because of that. Because that was the part of the book that was so good. The part of the book that was so good was the fact that it was so dark, it was so hopeless because of how real it was. So don't make it not real. That was my complaint. All right. So other things that were good about the book. The relationship between the boy and the dad, I thought was a very good relationship. Again, I think the narrator kind of ruined it slightly for me because the way that the man talks to the boy was kind of harsh and abrupt. And so because of that, I didn't feel like there was as loving of a relationship there as there could have been. I felt like the relationship was almost a relationship out of responsibility instead of a relationship out of love. So, and I don't know if that's kind of the point or if that's what people liked about the book or didn't like about the book. I know that there are a lot of people who are like, I couldn't read this book because I have a son that's roughly the same age and it just brought me to tears. But I just felt like the man didn't love the boy as much as I was kind of hoping. I mean, that's the purpose of this book, right? And that was kind of what I got from all of the people that recommended this book to me, and what I got from, when I was reading about why this book was why this book's ranked one of the greatest books of all time. It was because of this relationship between the boy and the father. And I just felt like the relationship was a little hollow, and it was mostly a relationship out of responsibility. And maybe I'm just picking up on things that I shouldn't have picked up on, but it was a little, that part was a little sad to me. I wanted a deeper connection for the relationship, but I did think that there was, ultimately this underlying level of responsibility that the father felt for the son. And you could tell with the brief black backstory that was given with the mother and what happened with the mother, that you could really tell how much the father lived up to that responsibility of being a father. Now, if there's any message that is the ultimate good about this book, it is the responsibility, like it's not the love of fathers. I would say it's the responsibility of fatherhood. Because, like I said, the love between the two of them doesn't really come across in the book. But what does come across in the book, and what comes in spades, is the responsibility of fatherhood, and how the father in the book did absolutely everything he could from start to finish to provide and care for and protect his son, no matter what. no matter how he felt, no matter what the situation was, no matter the craziness going around them, and despite the world falling apart, dark and dreary, nobody, I mean, I think, isn't that what they say about character? Character only counts when nobody's watching. And so there's nobody left on the planet. Nobody's watching you. Nobody would care if you just left your son to fend for himself. Nobody would care if you ended it right there. Nobody would care about any of those things. If you gave up, nobody would care because nobody's watching you. There's nobody left. But it shows to the character of the father, what he values most. And it was what that character valued most was his responsibility as a father. Again, I don't know that I'd go so far as to say love, because I didn't get that in the book. I didn't get that touchy-feely love, but I did get that the most important thing to that man was his responsibility as a father. And I thought that was amazing. I thought that came across so well. And I thought, again, that was the best part of the book. The best part of the book, and honestly, what will make me say that I didn't hate this book is the last 10 minutes of the book when, spoiler alert, the father is dying. When the father is dying and he realizes that he's dying and he realizes that he can't continue on in that responsibility, it's beautiful. Like, that is beautiful right there. The relationship that the boy has with the father, the way that he looks up to him, the way that he needs him, the way that throughout even kind of the insane journey that they've been on and all of the terrible things that they've seen, that, the boy still sees his father as his father, up until the very end, I thought was absolutely beautiful. And it was really, that part was moving. The last 10 minutes of the book are really, really good. Like, really, really, really good. I will say that. Like, anybody who says that this book was straight garbage is wrong. The last 10 minutes of the book are really, really good. You get a glimpse into, again, what the responsibility of fatherhood means to both of the characters. And I just think it was really good. But outside of that last 10 minutes, there's just not a lot. There's just not enough going on. It's almost like the entire book is a setup for that last 10 minutes. And that's okay if it is. If that's what it is, then that's okay. But it doesn't make a great book. Then it makes a decent book. And that's okay. It could be a decent book. It doesn't have to be a great book. But in my opinion, that was everything. Because outside of that last 10 minutes, there's not a whole lot of, there are not a whole lot of memorable moments in the book for me. The only other memorable moment in the book is when the son tries Coca-Cola for the first time. And the father's just happy to provide, a glimpse into what regular life was. And it's just happy to give that to his son. I thought that was kind of neat. But other than that, again, not a lot of memorable moments. But yeah, so that is my review of the book. My review of the book is that it was okay. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't the worst book I've ever read. It wasn't absolutely painful, but it was a little too repetitive. It was a little slow in the first little bit. And if that's a stylistic choice to try to really make you feel like you're living in this post-apocalyptic world, then great. Then awesome. The author accomplished what he was trying to accomplish. And then at the very end, he pulls it all together, makes you a little bit teary, gives you this moment in this book that really makes the whole book worth it. But I don't know. It just, as a whole book, wasn't my absolute favorite. And that's where I'm going to leave it. Because I don't want to trash on it, but I also don't want to build it up to be anything that it's not. It was a decent book. So, as far as my overall rankings of this book, I am going to give it a 2 out of 5 for fun. Again, I think it's a 2 out of 5. I think it was so good at the very end. I thought the world that it created was very unique in that it was hyper realistic. I thought it was very dark. It made you feel dark and gloomy. It did a very good job of conveying emotions. However, I was bored through a good chunk of this book, like actually bored through a good chunk of this book. So it's not a page turner. It's really only a book that I would read if you're okay reading slow books. If you're okay reading slow books with a big payoff at the very end, then read this book, because then it's all right. If you don't like slow books and you kind of are, need something to be happening and you want to see a story progress and you want to see, large character arcs and things like that, this is not the book for you. There are no large character arcs. There's no nothing. It is a very simple story about a very simple relationship between a father and a son that has a way too long setup and then a very brief moment of just amazingness at the very end. So 2 out of 5 for fun. As far as importance, I'll give it a 4 out of 5 for importance. I don't think it's the most important book in the world, just because, again, of how lacking of fun that I think it was. However, I do think it's an important book because of the cultural impact that it's had. I think it's an important book because, obviously winning a Pulitzer Prize, being on Oprah Winfrey's book list, just in general, the amount of people that have read this book and, kind of the impact of this book, I think is important on society. So if you want to understand just different authors throughout time and different influential authors throughout time, I do think that this is a book that's important. I do also feel like the book's ability to set up kind of a helpless and hopeless backdrop was probably pretty influential into a lot of other authors. So I would say that there are probably, in my opinion, a lot of authors who pull from this book when trying to create a bleak world. And so that makes this book very influential. So I'd give it a 4 out of 5 on importance, but a 2 out of 5 on fun. So you got to, kind of weigh it there, decide what you want to do with it. But all in all, I'm not mad that I read this book. I'm not disappointed I read this book. I'm not even disappointed in the book, but it's just not one of my favorites. And that's okay. Not every book is going to be your favorite, but it's important to read books that even you don't like, because how do you know what you like if you don't know what you don't like? So I definitely figured out some things that I don't like with this book, and that's okay. Awesome. So if you have been listening here to the end of the podcast, thank you for listening along, and make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And definitely leave me a comment. If you loved this book, tell me why, because I'm very interested as to why. And if you didn't like this book, go ahead and tell me why you didn't like this book. If it's a lot of the same reasons that I had, let me know. And if you are listening on anywhere that you're listening anywhere that Spotify is listened to. No, anywhere that podcasts are listened to, like Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or Google Podcasts or iHeartRadio, any of them. I mean, the podcast is everywhere. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review and tell your friends about the podcast. And if you are interested in being on the podcast, please reach out to our Instagram channel. Let us know if you'd like to be on the podcast. We can get you on for one of the books coming up. And make sure to, man, this is the longest outro ever. I need to speed this up. Make sure to check out our reading list for 2024. It's posted on the Instagram. It's also posted on the community page for our YouTube. Check out what books are coming up so you can read along with us. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.